Fernando Mendoza hasn't even fully settled in with the Raiders, and the drama is already starting. After the rookie quarterback arrived with massive expectations, rumors are now spreading that tensions behind the scenes, maybe pushing some Raiders stars toward the exit. Here's what's happening. On April 24, 2026, Fernando Mendoza stood at the Intermountain Health Performance Center in Henderson, Nevada, flanked by general manager John Spytek and head coach Clint Kubiak, after being selected as the #1 overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft. He was holding up a silver and black jersey with the number 15 on it, the same number as Raider legend quarterback and coach Tom Flores, and he received Flores' blessing to do so. The moment was supposed to signal hope, a new era, a franchise quarterback finally arriving after years of wandering in the desert. But here's what else happened in the weeks and months surrounding Mendoza's arrival. The Raiders released quarterback Geno Smith at the start of the new league year. He was subsequently traded to the New York Jets in a late-round pick swap. Five-time Pro Bowl pass rusher Maxx Crosby, the unquestioned face of the Raiders' defense, had requested a trade and was agreed to be sent to the Baltimore Ravens for 2 first-round picks. Former 7th overall pick Tyree Wilson was traded to the New Orleans Saints for a 5th-round selection. Pete Carroll, the head coach who was supposed to bring credibility to the franchise, was fired after just 1 season, and a handful of other players, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Parham, Darnay Holmes, Lonnie Johnson, all departed in free agency without the Raiders making much of an effort to retain them. All of this happened while the organization made it clear that everything, the signings, the draft, the coaching hire, was being oriented around one man: Fernando Mendoza. Mendoza was coming off one of the best quarterback seasons in college football history. At Indiana, he led the Hoosiers to a perfect 16-0 record and the first national championship in program history. En route to winning the Heisman Trophy, he was the consensus best player in the draft. No one really needed to be told that the Heisman Trophy winner and national champion from Indiana was going to be the first pick. Everyone knew, the football-watching public knew, Mark Davis knew. And yet, while the coronation was taking place, familiar faces were being escorted out the back door. The natural conclusion that many fans and observers have drawn is straightforward. The arrival of Mendoza triggered the departure of established Raiders players. The franchise chose a 22-year-old rookie over proven veterans. And if you just look at the names who left and the timeline of Mendoza's drafting, that narrative holds water on the surface. But the real story is far more layered, far more chaotic, and far more revealing about the state of the Las Vegas Raiders than any single draft pick could explain. To understand what is happening in Las Vegas and why so many recognizable names are no longer wearing silver and black, you have to go back to the season that set all of this in motion. The 2025 Las Vegas Raiders season, a campaign so catastrophic that it didn't just end careers, it ended an entire organizational philosophy. The 2025 Raiders season was an exercise in sustained misery. Under head coach Pete Carroll, the Raiders went 3-14, with an offense that was dead last in the NFL in points and yards. That is not a typo, dead last. 32nd out of 32 teams in both categories. The offense couldn't score, it couldn't move the ball, and it couldn't protect whoever was behind center. At quarterback, the situation was a revolving door of futility. The Raiders cycled through 7 starting signal callers over 3 seasons, and went 15-36 during that span following Derek Carr's departure. In 2025 specifically, all 3 quarterbacks, Aidan O'Connell, Geno Smith, and Kenny Pickett, took turns starting, and none of them provided anything resembling stability. Smith, who had been acquired from Seattle and given a hefty 2-year, $75 million extension, suffered the worst of it. Playing behind a porous offensive line, Smith took a career-high and league-worst 55 sacks, and threw a league-high 17 interceptions in 15 games. For a 2-time Pro Bowler who had resurrected his career in Seattle, the Las Vegas experiment was an unmitigated disaster. He wasn't the problem. The infrastructure around him was the problem. But the numbers didn't care about context. The numbers were historically terrible. The offensive line was a wreck. 11 different players started at least 1 game in the trenches throughout the 2025 season. 11. That kind of instability doesn't just lose football games. It breaks quarterbacks. It breaks game plans. It breaks confidence. And the ripple effects traveled through every position group on the roster. Meanwhile, on defense, Maxx Crosby was doing what Maxx Crosby always does, carrying the entire unit on his back. For a 4th consecutive season, Crosby led the Raiders in sacks with 10.0 and tackles for loss with 28, finishing 2nd in the league in the latter category. His efforts earned him his 5th consecutive Pro Bowl nod. But individual dominance doesn't translate to team success. When everything around you is crumbling, the Raiders finished with a record so poor that they locked themselves into the #1 overall pick for the first time in years. And it was during this spiral that the fractures between Crosby and the organization widened into chasms. When the Raiders told Crosby that he would not play in their Week 17 game against the New York Giants, Crosby left the facility. He was frustrated not just about being shut down, but about the direction of the franchise. He was aware that he needed surgery in the fall, but continued to play until the Raiders decided to shut him down, a decision that left him frustrated. Some of his own teammates were caught off guard. I was kind of surprised. I've seen Maxx play through a lot of injuries, so it's always surprising when he's out. Raiders edge rusher Malcolm Kuntz told ESPN, "This was the environment that created the conditions for the Fernando Mendoza era. The Raiders didn't just need a new quarterback, they needed a new everything. And the moment they decided to rebuild around Mendoza, the players who didn't fit the new timeline were always going to be on borrowed time." Carroll was fired. Clint Kubiak, the former Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator, was brought in as head coach. And the roster purge began in earnest. Of all the departures and near departures that have rocked the Raiders this offseason, none has been as dramatic, as emotional, or as revealing as the Maxx Crosby trade saga. This wasn't a quiet exit. This was a soap opera that played out across social media, private planes, medical facilities, and war rooms in 2 different cities. Crosby's road out of Las Vegas began with that December shutdown, but it accelerated after the season ended. He underwent meniscus repair surgery on January 7th and vowed to be more than ready for training camp. But the question was whether he would be in a Raiders uniform. The organization appeared headed for a rebuild. Crosby wanted to win now. After 7 years of giving everything to a franchise that kept losing, the 5-time Pro Bowler made his feelings known. And yet, publicly, the Raiders pushed back. Owner Mark Davis had been pretty adamant about not trading Crosby in recent years, at one point emailing ESPN to tell them Maxx isn't going anywhere. At the NFL Combine in February, Spytek stated, "Maxx is an elite player, and I've been very upfront from the start when I got here, that we're in the business of having really good players on the team." But at the same time, Spytek didn't say Crosby was untradeable. The Raiders were open to the idea, but only for a king's ransom for the Raiders to part ways with their franchise cornerstone. They needed an offer that included multiple first-round picks. Then, on March 6th, that offer materialized. The Raiders agreed to trade Crosby to the Ravens in exchange for the number 14 pick. In the 2026 draft and a first-round pick in 2027, it was a blockbuster. It was the first time in franchise history that Baltimore traded a first-round pick for a veteran player. The next day, Crosby bid farewell to the Raiders in an emotional video that he published on his social media accounts. Raider Nation was devastated. Their warrior was leaving. But then everything fell apart in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The Ravens flew Crosby to Washington, D.C., and then drove him to Baltimore so he could take his physical and MRI. On March 10th, Crosby met with Ravens coach Jesse Minter and general manager Eric DeCosta, who expressed concerns with the evaluation. The next day, the bombshell landed. The Las Vegas Raiders announced that the Baltimore Ravens had backed out of the trade. League sources told ESPN that the Ravens rescinded the deal because of medical concerns that arose during a physical. The NFL world was stunned. One general manager summarized the feelings around the league with the following: "This is very much bull on Baltimore's part." Crosby himself was blindsided. He said he was livid and confused by the Ravens' decision. "That's a lot on your mental. At that moment, I was scared." Here was a man who had already said goodbye to his teammates, to a fan base that adored him, to a city he'd called home for 7 years, and now he was being told that the trade wasn't happening. The Ravens sent him in a private plane back to Las Vegas in the evening, and Crosby returned to the Raiders facility the next day. The fallout was messy. Crosby's surgeon, Dr. Neil Elatrache, told ESPN that Crosby was doing very well in the early part of his rehab and recovery, and was on track for his planned program. Crosby is expected to be ready to play by training camp in July. The implication was clear. The Ravens had overreacted or had other motives. Less than 24 hours after the decision, the Ravens signed former Cincinnati Bengals edge rusher Trey Hendrickson to a 4-year, $112 million deal. They had a backup plan ready to go all along. And here is where the Crosby situation connects directly to the Mendoza conversation. The Raiders had already committed enormous resources in free agency. Nearly $300 million to free agents on the first day of the negotiating window. Partly with the understanding that they were going to save about $30 million in cap space with the Crosby trade. When that trade collapsed, the Raiders had to figure out how to honor all of those commitments, while still carrying Crosby's hefty contract. All of those free agent signings were designed to build a competitive roster around Fernando Mendoza. The Crosby trade was supposed to fund part of that construction. Eventually, Crosby rescinded his trade request, and the Raiders have built arguably the best defense of his career. He reiterated his commitment to the team. "I'm here. I'm meant to be a Raider," Crosby said. But the fact that it got to the point where he filmed a farewell video tells you everything about how dramatically the landscape shifted when the organization decided to rebuild around Mendoza. While the Crosby saga was playing out in real time, the Raiders front office was executing one of the most aggressive roster reconstructions in recent NFL memory. This wasn't a slow, methodical rebuild. This was a wrecking ball, followed by a construction crew working triple shifts. And every single transaction, every signing, every cut, and every trade was made with one objective in mind: putting Fernando Mendoza in the best possible position to succeed. It started at the top. Pete Carroll was fired after the 3-14 season, and Clint Kubiak was hired as head coach. Kubiak wasn't just any coordinator. He had won a Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator, and more importantly, he ran a system that the Raiders believed would maximize a young quarterback's development. Kubiak had a 52.6 under center rate in Seattle, second highest in the NFL, which meant Mendoza was going to have to learn an entirely new way of operating. But the organization believed in the long-term vision. Then came the quarterback room overhaul. Geno Smith was the first to go. Releasing Smith was an expected move, as the Raiders owned the #1 overall pick and were widely expected to select Mendoza. Cutting Smith saved the Raiders $8 million on the salary cap, while forcing them to eat $18.5 million in dead money. He was subsequently traded to the Jets, where he'd returned to the franchise that originally drafted him back in 2013. Kenny Pickett departed in free agency to the Panthers. In their place, the Raiders brought in a familiar face for Kubiak, veteran Kirk Cousins. The Falcons released Cousins, and the Raiders signed him to a 2-year, $12.6 million deal to serve as a mentor for Mendoza. Cousins is a 4-time Pro Bowler with 167 career starts, and he played under Kubiak for 3 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. The message was clear. The Raiders didn't want a veteran quarterback to compete with Mendoza. They wanted a seasoned professional to teach him. On the offensive line, the unit that had been historically dysfunctional in 2025, the Raiders made their marquee move. They signed center Tyler Linderbaum to a record deal, a 3-time Pro Bowler who had missed just 2 games in his career with the Baltimore Ravens. That signing was, as one report put it, all about making things as comfortable as possible for presumed first overall draft pick, quarterback Fernando Mendoza. They also brought in guard Spencer Burford, who had played under Kubiak in San Francisco. The offensive line wouldn't be giving up 55 sacks again. Not if Spytek had anything to say about it. Defensively, the spending spree was even more dramatic. The Raiders signed Kwity Paye to a 3-year, $48 million deal. Nakobe Dean signed a 3-year, $36 million deal with $20 million guaranteed. Quay Walker signed a 3-year, $40.5 million deal with $28 million guaranteed. They acquired cornerback Taron Johnson from the Buffalo Bills in a trade. They re-signed Eric Stokes on a 3-year, $30 million deal. Malcolm Kuntz was re-signed on a 1-year, $11 million deal. On offense, they signed wide receiver Jalen Naylor on a 3-year, $35 million deal, reuniting him with Kirk Cousins from their time together in Minnesota. In the draft itself, the Raiders didn't stop at Mendoza. They selected safety Tre'Dan Stukes from Arizona at number 38, defensive end Kieran Crawford from Auburn at number 67, cornerback Jeremiah McCoy from Cal at number 101, and running back Mike Washington Jr. from Arkansas at Nov 122. They selected 10 players total across the 3 days of the draft. The scale of the transformation was staggering. When Crosby returned to the Raiders after the Ravens trade fell through, he rejoined a different Raiders team. That is not an exaggeration. The roster had been gutted and rebuilt in the span of a few weeks, and every brick that was laid, every check that was signed, was part of the blueprint to surround Fernando Mendoza with enough talent to give a rookie quarterback a fighting chance in the most competitive division in football. The casualties of that blueprint, Smith, Wilson, Pickett, Parham, and nearly Crosby, were not forced out because Mendoza personally replaced them. They were part of a regime and a roster that had produced the worst offense in the NFL. The moment the organization decided that Mendoza was the future, the past had to be cleared away. There was no room for sentimentality. There was no room for contracts that didn't serve the new direction. There was only room for the plan. And so, with all the destruction and construction completed, what about the man who triggered this earthquake? Who exactly is Fernando Mendoza? And is the weight of this entire franchise overhaul something a 22-year-old rookie quarterback can realistically carry? Mendoza attended Christopher Columbus High School in Miami, Florida, where he passed for 1,396 yards and 16 touchdowns, while rushing for 137 yards and a score. He was not a five-star recruit. He originally committed to play college football at Yale University, before choosing Cal Berkeley instead. Think about that for a moment. The #1 overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft nearly went to an Ivy League school. His path to this moment was not paved with SEC recruiting battles and ESPN documentary crews. It was built on transfers, development, and a relentless work ethic. He redshirted during the 2022 season at Cal. He earned his first career start in Week 6 of the 2023 season against Oregon State. He played 2 solid but unspectacular seasons as a Golden Bear, completing 63% of his passes for 1,708 yards and 14 touchdowns as a redshirt freshman, and improving in his second year. In 2024, he was the 3rd leading passer in the ACC, with 3,004 passing yards and 18 total touchdowns. He was good, but he wasn't the consensus #1 pick. Not yet. Then came the transfer. On December 23, 2024, Mendoza announced his decision to transfer to Indiana University. And that decision changed everything. Under coach Curt Cignetti, Mendoza transformed into a force of nature. He guided the Hoosiers to their first conference championship since 1967 and secured the program's first national championship and undefeated season. He became the first Heisman Trophy winner in school history. His Heisman campaign was accompanied by the Walter Camp Award, Maxwell Award, AP College Football Player of the Year, Davey O'Brien Award, Manning Award, and Big Ten Most Valuable Player. In the college football playoffs, he recorded an 8-touchdown interception ratio. He was flawless in the moments that mattered most. Indiana defeated Miami 27-21 in the national championship game, and Mendoza was named the national championship offensive MVP. The Raiders did their homework on him thoroughly over the past 7 months. Ownership and the front office flew commercial and private, rented cars in the South and the Midwest, stayed in big cities and small towns, and poured endless hours into studying the 2026 draft's quarterbacks. On Black Friday, Spytech saw Mendoza play in person for the first time. In his regular season finale against Purdue, the impression was immediate and visceral. That was the first time I stood next to Fernando. You're like, he's a big dude, Spytech recalled, but it was more than physical tools. It was the character, the leadership, the mentality. At his pro day, Mendoza didn't use the session to showcase himself. He used it for his teammates, letting them know what routes to run, so they could show off their skills to the scouts. That selflessness is what sealed it for Kubiak. And when the time came, and so we're on the clock, we were like, call up Fernando. He's the guy, Spytech recalled. He now becomes the 5th Heisman Trophy winner to be drafted by the Raiders organization, joining Marcus Allen, Bo Jackson, Tim Brown, and Charles Woodson. That is rarefied company, and Mendoza seems to understand the weight of the moment without being crushed by it. When asked about his leadership approach in Las Vegas, he didn't come in with bravado. However, coming into a new organization, starting from the bottom of the totem pole, I believe that leadership is earned, not given. Mendoza told the Raiders team website. At rookie minicamp, Mendoza described the volume of information coming his way. In Kubiak's West Coast offense, as a fire hose. Across 3 college seasons, he had taken just 5 snaps from under center. 5. And now he was working in a system that demanded it on the majority of plays. The adjustment is real. The challenge is enormous. And yet there is reportedly a belief within the league that Mendoza will not begin the 2026 season as the starting quarterback. An anonymous NFL executive told The Athletic, All indications are they are going to make Mendoza sit. Another exec expressed a similar timeline, saying, "I think Mendoza will thrive there with Clint Kubiak, but it will take 2 or 3 years. They just don't have a good enough team." Kirk Cousins, the 37-year-old veteran, might be the placeholder for now. So are Raiders stars really leaving because of Fernando Mendoza? Here is the honest answer. Geno Smith didn't leave because of Mendoza. He left because he threw 17 interceptions behind the worst offensive line in football, on a team that went 3-14. The moment the Raiders secured the first overall pick, Smith's tenure was over regardless of who that pick turned out to be. Tyree Wilson didn't leave because of Mendoza. He was a former 7th overall pick who never developed into the player Las Vegas thought he would be and was traded for a day 3 draft pick to move up in the order. Pete Carroll wasn't fired because of Mendoza. He was fired because the 2025 season was historically bad, and the organization wanted a coach who could develop a young quarterback. And Maxx Crosby. The situation is more complicated. He didn't want out because of Mendoza specifically. He wanted out because the organization appeared headed for a rebuild, and the pass rusher wants to win now. After 7 seasons and a 46-71 record as a Raider, his patience had run thin. The failed Baltimore trade was an earthquake, but in the aftermath, Crosby rescinded his trade request and committed to the Raiders. The team built around him. The arrival of Paye, Dean, Walker, and the defensive reinforcements gave Crosby something he hadn't had in years: real help. The truth is, Fernando Mendoza didn't push anyone out the door. What pushed people out was the wreckage of the 2025 season and the radical decision by the front office to burn it down and start over. Mendoza was the seed around which the new garden was planted. And sometimes when you plant a garden, you first have to clear the old one. Some of those old plants leave willingly. Some get pulled up by the roots. And some, like Crosby, get transplanted right back into the new soil. The feeling has been different for the silver and black this offseason. This year, you could see the change around this franchise because they had a good draft. They addressed it all and are now getting to work on developing these rookies, for they could be in Vegas for a long time. No, the Raiders are probably not going to the playoffs yet, especially because they reside in the difficult AFC West, but they will be a more respectable, more competitive, and much more interesting team in 2026. Whether Fernando Mendoza becomes the franchise quarterback the Raiders have been searching for since the days of Rich Gannon remains to be seen. Whether the massive investment pays off or collapses under its own weight is a question only time can answer. But one thing is certain: stars didn't leave the Raiders because of Fernando Mendoza. They left because the old Raiders were beyond saving, and the new Raiders, Mendoza's Raiders, are being built from the ground up.